Hi again everyone, Josh here with Northern Frogger. Today is going to be the fruit fly video. So I make my own media recipe that I've kind of been tinkering with for a while. I've been using quite a while. I still kind of change it up every now and then, but um, I'm going to show you what I'm using right now for my media, how I mix that up, and how I make the cultures themselves. Alright, so for my fly mixture, there's going to be three main ingredients. That's going to be this instant potato mix, just the original plain mashed potato mix, and sugar. I'm going to use icing sugar. In Canada, it's usually called icing sugar. I think in the U.S. they call it powdered sugar usually, but it's the same thing. And the only reason I use this is just because it's really fine. It really is like that powder instead of the granules that you would typically find sugar in. And then this stuff is going to be where a lot of the nutrition comes from. Going to get some protein out of this as well. But this is brewer's yeast. It doesn't have to be debittered. This is just the stuff I ended up with. But do be careful when you're looking for this stuff, because there's brewing yeast and brewer's yeast, and they're not the same thing. You can get brewing yeast, which are the active cultures. And that's what you would put in, like if you were making wine or beer or whatever, and that's going to start the process. It's going to create the actual alcohol content. And brewer's yeast are the inactive cultures, and this is basically what's left over after that process. So after the yeast has kind of gone through and done its thing, this is kind of what's left of it, and it just kind of rises to the top, and they kind of skim it off and dry it. But it's supposed to be really nutritious. So this is going to be the other thing. So these are the three main ingredients: the icing sugar, brewer's yeast, and the mashed potatoes. As well, I like to add some of this stuff. Just because the more nutrition you can put into your flies, the more nutritious they're going to be for the frogs, and the healthier your frogs are going to be. Kind of that whole "you are what you eat" thing. So try to make the fly mix as nutritious as possible. So I use this stuff. It's got a ton of different stuff in it, different kind of algae and all kinds of like powdered vegetables and fruits and stuff like that. So there's just going to be a ton of vitamins and micronutrients in this stuff. And then I also like to I replace my supplements about every 6 months, usually before they expire. And then I will put the old ones in my fly mix. So like this one, it doesn't expire for over another year, but I've already switched to a newer one of this Calcium Plus. But there's still some in here, so rather than waste this, I will just start putting it into the fly cultures. And then same thing with this one. I got some of that in there. So this one's almost empty. I'll probably just finish that one off today. And then this one, the Super Pig. And this Super Pig is just the carotenoids. But yeah, it kind of helps with red colors in the frogs. But they've done studies too that just frogs that are supplemented with carotenoids seem to have much better egg and tadpole survival rates, have healthier tadpoles. So I do dust these on the flies twice a month, but I also like to add it right into my fruit fly mixture. So that's basically it for the ingredients I use. And I do one additional thing with these potatoes, because they kind of come in you can see there, they're kind of like in a flake. It's rather large pieces, and everything else I'm using is a very fine powder. So I find if you just do it with this, like, it'll work, but I find the finer stuff tends to settle out towards the bottom of the container. So it's hard to get like an even distribution of your different ingredients if you just use the flakes. So I found it much better. I go through with like a coffee grinder, and I'll actually grind all these flakes into a very fine powder. These are the 389 gram boxes. And yeah, I'm going to grind up 2 of these at a time. And then just using this big pot here to mix everything in. So just grind it up in here and dump it in here as we go. So you guys don't really need to see that. I'll just grind that up and start the video again once all that is powdered. Okay, so we got our potato flakes ground up. And then the next thing, I use this brewer's yeast. I'm going to do 1 cup of this stuff. And it doesn't have to be exact, just kind of. And then same thing with the icing sugar. About 1 cup of this. And then I do about 1/4 cup of this green superfood stuff. And you don't need to get this exact stuff, but I would recommend getting something like this. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention before is that I also add paprika. I don't really measure this stuff. I just kind of give it a few good shakes. This is just kind of a additional carotenoid mainly. Give it a sprinkle of that. I usually add cinnamon in as well, but I'm actually out right now. I didn't realize I forgot I used up the last of it last time. So it's not a big deal. The cinnamon does kind of act as a natural anti-mold, antifungal agent, but I've never really had success using just the cinnamon to accomplish that. So I will mix this up with vinegar when I add the water as well. And that will be the main anti-mold agent. So the main reason I actually use cinnamon is that it helps with the smell. These cultures can start to smell a little nasty when they're getting towards the end of their life, but the cinnamon I find helps alleviate that a little bit. And then we're going to add some calcium plus. This I don't measure out all that well or all that closely either. We're going to do about a tablespoon of that. And I think I'm just going to... there's a little more in there than I thought. That was just the Supervite, the Repashy Supervite. Put some of that in there. The one thing I do usually measure out is the Super Pig. So about 2 tablespoons or so of that stuff in there. Yeah, I believe that's everything. The only other thing I would add in normally is cinnamon, but I don't have any right now, so not that big a deal. And then I just kind of use a fork and go through and stir it. Try and get it mixed up as evenly as possible. And then to store it, I actually use one of these Repashy Superfly containers. Just because I've got a bunch left over from when I used to use this stuff. This stuff is really good. I do like it a lot. I used it for the first couple years I was keeping dart frogs, but it just got to be too expensive. So yeah, basically I'll just store this mix in here, and with these measurements and everything, it's about perfect to fill one of these. So I don't know if the opaque container is really necessary, but I figure it can't hurt. So yeah, that's gonna pretty much fill one of those. But that's pretty much it for my mix. And then I'll usually go along and shake this a bunch too after I've got it in there, just to help mix it up a bit more. And then I'll usually give it a quick shake before each time I use it, just to try and make sure I've got that stuff mixed as evenly as possible, so you're not, just to maintain consistency from between batches of fruit flies. So that's it for how I make the actual media. Oh, I will store this in the fridge as well, in between uses, just to keep it a little fresher. But yeah, that's it for how I make the media. So now we'll mix up some actual cultures. Alright, so I've got the water boiling right now. I use an electric kettle. To boil water, I mix the water and vinegar first and boil them together, and I do about 2 parts water to 1 part vinegar. Doesn't have to be exact, but you want it somewhere around there. And then basically measure out the media into these cups. So I don't know exactly how much this is, but I use this 1/4 cup measure and do it not quite full. You can add more media and put more in the bottom. Your cultures will last a little bit longer. But there's definitely kind of a point where even if you have media in there that the flies could be eating, that the culture is just so gross by that point, just being like full of fly poop and mites, and like even with the vinegar you will start to get kind of mold growing eventually. So I find like after a certain point, like you don't really want to be taking flies out of there anyway, so it's not that beneficial to put too much media in. So yeah, I've kind of worked it out where they usually last about a month or so. I mean, they'll last longer than that, but that's about as long as I want to be taking flies out of there. And I think the kettle is done boiling, so I'm just going to grab that and start dumping water. I'd say I've put about 1 inch of water in the bottom of each cup. But it doesn't have to be that precise anyway. And you can always change it as you go. And then I just use a spoon and just kind of mix them up. This is about the consistency that I would go to. It's kind of solid, but if you tip it to the side, it will run a little bit, but like not too much. You don't want it super runny, at least I don't. You can kind of play with it. It's going to change a bit depending on where you live and what the humidity is like. It's pretty dry here, so I leave them a little bit runny. They will also thicken up a bit as they cool. So yeah, as you can kind of see, you want it to kind of be able to stand on itself a little bit, like if you were to stir it, but then if you kind of bang it down, it'll mostly flatten out. That's kind of how I judge it. Alright, so that basically does it for mixing up the media. And then the last stage is basically to add something for the flies to crawl on. So I normally use coffee filters, just because I always have lots of coffee filters. The other main thing that people use is Aspen Excelsior. which is just like kind of a finely shredded wood product, almost like spaghetti wood. And both kind of have pros and cons in my opinion. The Excelsior is nice because it does provide more surface area, tons of room for the flies to crawl on, to lay their eggs, and for the maggots to crawl up and pupate on. But I do find it to be quite messy. Like, there's always little pieces of it falling out of the cups when you're shaking your flies out, and they end up in the tanks and they don't really break down all that well. They end up growing mold and stuff. So I find it kind of annoying that way, just because I find it really messy. Actually, the best way I've ever found to do it is to use a mixture of both and put like an inch of Excelsior right in the bottom against the media, and that provides a ton of area for the maggots to crawl out and pupate and stuff like that. And then I'd spread my coffee filters out similar to this, kind of on top, and that kind of keeps the coffee filters dry. Sometimes they kind of get wet and sink in and get gross in the media, but it keeps them up out of the media. And then also, as it kind of closes in the top, it prevents a lot of the pieces of Excelsior from falling out. So that's basically how I do it. I'll probably use about 6 to 8 coffee filters per thing, and I'll just pull one out and fold it a couple times and kind of stick it in there. Simple as that. Kind of a pain to pull apart, I know. One trick I like to do is you take the stack, fold it back and forth a couple times. I'll start to loosen them up, and then if you just kind of take them, these ones are just coming apart like crazy, but you can kind of take it and work it, kind of knead it almost to one side, and it'll spread them out like this, and then it tends to make it a lot easier to pull them apart. And then just take one of these vented lids I already showed you how to make, pop them on there. Be careful when you're popping them down, because as this plastic is hot, you can actually, these containers will just collapse if you push on them too hard when they're hot. Then you wait till it cools, and then dump about 50 or so flies in, and that's pretty much it. Alright, so that's going to do it for this video. Hopefully you learned a thing or two from that. That's just how I do my flies. I know there's lots of different recipes, lots of different ways people do them, but that's what I found has worked pretty good for me. Yeah, I'd say about 3 years I've been using this basic recipe. All the adults are producing lots of eggs. I get really good survival rates out of my eggs and my tadpoles, so I'm pretty happy with how I'm doing this. So combined with this mixture plus supplementation at every feeding, I feel like these frogs are staying pretty healthy. So as usual, guys, if you have any questions, I don't know, I might have missed some stuff, overlooked things. If you have any questions about this, or comments or suggestions, or you want to share how you make fruit flies, anything like that, leave me a comment down below. Thanks a lot for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and I will talk to you next time. Happy frogging.